So we'll jump right in with the questions. Scott, when risk managers approach you when they're first looking for coverage, what are the main concerns that they're interested in with respect to network security and privacy?
I think a lot of the conversations today still start with, is this liability contemplated in traditional insurance policies, GL, any other EPL policies, D&O? Where do you draw the lines between where could this liability be covered? And, from a sales perspective, we're often looked at with a little bit of skepticism in the sense that, are we trying to sell you something new that's untested, unfounded, et cetera? So once we can draw the line between for various reasons, these liabilities aren't contemplated in traditional coverages because of the definition of electronic data, tangible property damage, et cetera, et cetera. Now, let's talk about, okay, what do the new products do? Certainly a big component of discussion is, can you provide examples of paid losses? What could this potentially cost me? So we start to reference some of the studies and data points out there from Ponyman and others. And then really from an educational standpoint, a lot of our client dialogues still involve, walk me through coverage. Okay, let's segment it into breach mitigation, regulatory, liability. What do I need to be concerned with? And then, from a carrier perspective, who's the most competent? Who has the claims paying track record? Who can I rely on when something happens and I actually need to use coverage? Can you give me examples of positive outcomes from a coverage perspective to give me the confidence? Because ultimately it all boils down to, this is still a discretionary coverage. Risk managers and organizations don't have to buy, so we have to arm them with all the tools for them to go back and make the case internally to whomever they report to get the budget approved, get the authority to buy, get buy-in from the various constituents within their firm, whether it's IT or their legal department, CFO, et cetera, to put something like this in place.
We often hear a lot, what type of limit should we purchase? That's a common question. How would you respond to that, Scott?
I think there's a bunch of data points that we often talk about. I mean, you can look at the biggest catastrophic breaches that we're all very familiar with, right? Sony, Heartland, Epsilon, et cetera. Realistically, I reference a lot of the stats, and the easiest one to talk about is Ponyman, right? The last report indicated that the average breach in 2011 cost $5.5 million on average, which equates to about $194 per record, a third of which is direct costs, two-thirds is indirect costs. So a lot of times, as a baseline, I say, you want a hard and fast estimate of what your exposure could be, at least on the PII side of things. It's $65 times some odd number of records that you use, store, maintain, et cetera. And then you start to have more of an in-depth discussion about what's more meaningful to you in terms of, would you rather maybe look towards a more robust program that has full limits for mitigation piece, regulatory piece? Does your balance sheet support enough of a responsibility in the front end to maybe handle a larger retention versus a lower retention? So then you kind of put all the pieces together. I think that our data, at least that we use from our perspective, probably shows that the sweet spot across all industry sectors, looking at more of a larger client base, so call it Fortune 1000-ish or so, is somewhere in the $20 to $50 million range. And then you have your large outliers, big FIs, big healthcare institutions, big retailers, et cetera, that purchase upwards of 100, maybe even $200 million in some cases. So I think it's all of that stuff combined, wrap in budgetary flexibility, and really just lay out a menu of options and then figure out what makes the most sense for that particular organization, all factors considered.